Thank you for viewing this program presented by the Citizens Water Advocacy Group, CWAG. I'm Gary Beverly, president of CWAG. We are a local nonprofit corporation established in 2002. Boy, where does all the time go? And run by volunteers and the board. Our vision is that all residents of the Upper Verde River Basin and the Prescott Active Management Area have a sustainable supply of clean water that flows in the springs and streams are maintained, and that water quality in our lakes, streams, and homes meets Clean Water Act standards. We hope you noticed our advertisements in the Courier, which are designed to drive readers to our website. CWAGAZ.org is full of information on local water issues. Let me put our website on screen and show you a couple of things. So here's our website, and it's Citizens Water Advocacy Group, so CWAGAZ.org. So you see a blue menu bar here, and there's I just want to point out a couple of features. This section on our water supply is one that we've added in the last few months. And it click there, and it shows these submenus over here on the left. And then you click on those, and those unfold even deeper. So there's a ton of information in here that a lot of fascinating reading. This section on the Verde River, clicking on that word, has a similar setup, a submenu here, and articles that describe these topics. This conservation section, it relates to personal water conservation steps you can make. And the frequently asked questions. Now, just last night, added some new ones here, and in particular, myths versus reality. So clicking on the submenu, we go through a whole series of myths and explain why it's not correct. And so when you click on that title, it expands out and shows you more stuff. So this is really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of these myths and then devote most of the program to answering your questions. So this little quick links button over here is useful. This will get you to some introductory water info, some stuff to read to get you started. Here's how you can get onto our email list. Our video archive has videos of all of our past presentations. There's probably 90 videos here. Here's the one we gave last month. And then here's an important one. We really welcome the interest and support of new members. And so here's where you join, renew, or donate to CWAG. So please consider joining us. So today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website in that video archive later today. If you do not want your image captured, please turn off your video using the button in the bottom bar of the Zoom screen. And please keep your microphone muted so we don't get background noise, babies, dogs, other kinds of household noise. So responding to questions is a major part of this presentation. Viewers can submit questions at any time by using the chat button at the bottom bar of your screen. After the presentation, we will first respond to the written questions, and then we'll open it up just for verbal questions and a verbal discussion. So let's just go ahead and get started with today's presentation. We will first up, Ed Wolf and Peter Krupnick, the anchors of our science committee, will describe the current status of our aquifer and rivers, and this will be very brief. And then I will address some of the misinformation that floats around, and this misinformation and myths that is spread around is something that is of increasing concern to CWAG. So we're trying to tackle that with the frequently asked questions in the website and with a little bit of attention in this program. After reviewing a few key myths, then we'll go into question and answers. So there should be over an hour of time for you guys to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. It's kind of a stump the chumps scene this afternoon. So I hope you have a lot of good questions for us. So let me fire up the presentation here and begin. So the title is Critical Water Issues and Your Questions. So Ed Wolf, Peter Krupnik, and myself, Gary Beverly, are doing the presentation. So first up is Ed Wolf, who will talk about groundwater movement and depletion in the active management area. Ed, please continue.
Gary, you need your program on the screen, please.
Something happened and I didn't share that, sorry.
Ed, you're muted too.
All right, are you seeing that now?
I can see it, Gary.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, Ed, please continue.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so this first slide is a Google Earth view of the Prescott Active Management Area. And the purpose of this slide is just to help you really locate where the active management area, and in particular, the aquifer is. So you'll see kind of in the center of the slide is a sort of an egg-shaped, smooth, relatively smooth looking tan area distinct from the surroundings. And that area is the area of the aquifer. It stands out very nicely for a couple of reasons. It doesn't have a lot of topographic relief. It's a relatively smooth, flat surface. And it is, to a significant extent, a grassland. It doesn't have a lot of big trees, except in places where people have planted them. And so it really sticks out distinctly. The surrounding rocks, which comprise a part of the active management area, do not hold or transmit much water. They are rocks that range in age from about 300 million years old to about 1.8 million years old. They are relatively dry. It's the central area, the aquifer area, which is this area right in here, extending down to Dewey Humboldt, up through the town of Chino Valley and over to Williamson Valley Road, etc., which is the aquifer. Next slide, please. This is a map of the same area. The white part is the area of the aquifer, and the gray part is the surrounding much older rocks. And we pump our water from the aquifer. This could stand a little explaining. The Prescott Active Management Area is got to be the smallest one in the state, smallest active management area. Its area is about 485 square miles. And I would guess that the aquifer portion of that is roughly half of that 485 square miles. The groundwater is up to several hundred feet below the surface. And you see small numbers in here. Here's 201, 214, 425, etc. Those numbers are the depth to the top of the groundwater. So the groundwater in most of it is not near the surface. It's at substantial depth in the aquifer, and wells have to get down and get into that groundwater. So they've got to get below that depth to get any water at all. Groundwater is always moving. It is supplied by rainfall and stream runoff, and it moves to exits. And there are two exits from the aquifer. One, can you see my arrow, by the way?
No, I'm pointing for you though.
Okay, well, one exit is up here north of the town of Chino Valley. The other exit is down here just immediately below Dewey Humboldt. And water seeps into the aquifer runoff. It soaks into the ground and works its way down to the water table, which is commonly several hundred feet below the surface, and then it moves slowly toward the exits. These arrows portray the direction of flow of the groundwater. And groundwater moves pretty slowly. Think of it in terms of maybe a foot per day. That's slow. If it had to go a mile, that would take 5,000 approximately, very approximately 5,300 days. That's a relatively long time. And we're talking about many miles here. So the groundwater table has been lowered primarily as a consequence of groundwater pumping over the years. And in the decade from 1994 to 2004, it lowered substantially. The little red and orange and yellow dots portray the amount of decline of the groundwater table. So the red, which is fairly rare, says that during that decade, the water table declined more than 30 feet per year. That would be about 3 feet a year or more. The orange dots like this are much more abundant, and they record measured declines between 30 and 15 feet in this 10 years. So we're looking at 3 to 1.5 feet per year on these, and the yellow dots record declines between 15 feet and 1 foot in this 10-year period. So we have a constantly declining water table, and that's an important part of our water issue. Guess that's what I wanted to say on this one. Let's go to the next. I want to take just a second on this. It leads to a second map, but it's essential to understand this one. This is a map of the aquifer produced of the Prescott Active Management Area, produced in what's called the third management plan. And it shows water level change in feet between 1940 and 1994. So a period of 54 years. And most of the water level change was between 75 and 100 feet. This is a contour map. These are contours that show the amount of decline at the water table. So this is the 75-foot contour, and it means that everything inside, all wells inside this contour, declined between 75 and 100 feet. There is no 100-foot contour, so at that time, the ADWR, Department of Water Resources, didn't find any wells with declines of more than 100 feet, but they could be anywhere up to 100 feet. So inside this inner line, declines would be, let's say, between 75 and 99.9 feet. And then here's a 50-foot contour. The decline is less here. And here's a 25-foot contour, and the decline is less here. So this is a map showing the amount of measured declines of wells. The zero contour is here and here. These declines of the water table were a consequence of irrigation, municipal wells, primarily for the city of Prescott and the town of Chino Valley, and ever-growing numbers of homes. Next slide, please. This is exactly the same map, but I've added to it data from wells, from test wells, monitoring wells that were added between 1994 and 210. So you get, and what I did was to add inside this 75-foot contour, I added the depth. That last measurement of depth I added to 75. So actually any one of these numbers in here could be a bit bigger. But the point is we've got more than and at least 100 feet of decline over most of this area in here, working away. Now this is clear across Prescott Valley. So this is a big area, Chino Valley and the fringes of Prescott. Most of Prescott is on the ancient rocks that don't hold groundwater. So this is really a major area for groundwater. I guess that's the main thing there. We're averaging across here in a general sense across this whole area, a decline of the water table, the top of the groundwater, of about 1.5 feet per year. Next slide, please.
Rio Springs.
Oh, Del Rio Springs. Thank you. I added Del Rio Springs because I'm going to talk next about what I call the catastrophe of Del Rio, or tragedy of Del Rio Springs. Let's go to the next. So here is a map. Del Rio Springs, which you just saw on the preceding slide, is located right here. The Verde River is here. The Prescott Active Management is the northern part of the Prescott Active Management area, is this uncolored area. It's uncolored because it's a grassland. It doesn't have forest very much. And a contrast to this area and this area, which is fairly forested. So Del Rio Springs, located here at about Road 6 North in the town of Chino Valley, was the place where the first military group coming into Arizona to protect people who are already here as miners camped. They arrived in 1863, in the winter of 1863, and they found a marvelous grassland right in this area. The spring is right here. The triangle is a stream gauge that the USGS installed much more recently. This is the springs right here. And so there was water, there was grass for their horses, and they spent the winter there. The thing that was missing right there was big trees to provide wood to build buildings and begin a town. And so in the succeeding spring in 1864, they moved their whole camp to Prescott. But this area was essentially the first government of Arizona, US government of Arizona. So they moved to Prescott. Now, when they arrived, well, I can't say when they arrived. The first measurements, which would have been back in around 1940, of the flow of Del Rio Spring was about 3,000 acre feet per year. Many years later, within the last 20 years or so, I don't remember exactly, the USGS installed a stream gauge right here just below Del Rio Springs, and the measured flow in the fall of 2021 was 140 acre feet per year. And that means that the magnificent stream that flowed in the Little Chino, was called Little Chino Wash, has dried up. It's dry. It runs if there's a good storm or good snow melt, but otherwise it's dry. Now, when it went dry, this stream along Little Chino Wash from the springs, which were here, to this area where Sullivan Lake is now. Sullivan Lake is an artificial feature built by men. That stream was perennial, and it was perennial all the way into the Verde River, which now actually heads right down here at these springs. And we have in fact lost about 6 miles of Verde, of what was once perennial year-round flow of the Verde River. We don't know exactly when that occurred. But Lori Wirt, who did a lot of work here and talked to a lot of people, concluded that perennial flow was probably lost around sometime in the 1970s. So not all that long ago, but a flowing live stream is gone, and it's gone as a consequence primarily of groundwater pumping. Next slide. So this is really very much related. This is a record from the Paulden Gauge. And what I did with this one was to look in every single year. I looked at the record of the stream gauge, and I found out the value of flow of the lowest continuous 7 days of the year. The purpose for doing that was to get rid of the effect of occasional big storms, which really change the record. So we just acted as if we just wanted to look at the lowest flows. They would continue all the time, and as stream flow decreased or increased, we would see that record in the lowest flows. So each dot represents the lowest 7 days of flow in a year from the period of from the mid 60s to the mid 90s. In general, this green line shows that in general, that flow was gaining slowly. It wasn't a huge gain. During that period, the river gained about 2,900 acre feet of flow. And then something changed in the mid 90s. I have 1996 marked just to mark it and give you a guide. Let's say in the mid 90s, and there was a substantial change in this low flow. It began to decrease, and during the period from the mid 90s to the present, it has decreased about 6,000 acre feet during that time. It turns out that there is a gauge installed by the Salt River Project farther upstream on the Verde River. This is near Paulden, downstream from Paulden on the Verde. The one upstream installed by the Salt River Project shows exactly this same pattern. It shows only this part of the pattern because it wasn't installed until around 2000 or a little after 2000, but it shows almost the identical loss in stream flow that we see here. That loss in stream flow is a consequence of two things: pumping to build hundreds and thousands of houses, and increasing temperature. Next slide. This is a diagram showing temperature over the period from 1895 through 2020. And the thing that is really striking to me, so this is the average annual temperature in Yavapai County from the Weather Service from 1895 annual temperature through 2020. And if you look moderately closely, you will see that temperatures in this area on the whole are substantially higher than anything that preceded it in the entire preceding century. That has got to be an issue of climate change. We just didn't have repeated temperatures. We had wild years where we had high temperatures, but we've got a tremendous knot of them here. And the average temperature in this area right here, the average temperature for that block is about 60 degrees, and the average temperature in the rest of it is about 58 degrees. That's a 2-degree increase in temperature since the mid 90s. So that's got to be a factor in what we're seeing with the water. So it's I don't think there's another slide. I think that's the last. Yes.
Okay, great. So next, Peter Krupnik is going to show what this water level decline looks like in wells. So Peter, please take it away.
Thank you, Gary. Let's go to the first slide. This is the same area Ed was showing. I've just put the little streets for the communities on there. I'm going to bring Ed's presentation down to the home. Okay, so the whole area is showing water changes, but what about my well? How does this affect me directly? So the numbers I've put on there, starting at the top, B160214. I'll show some water levels for each of these wells. That's call it a name that ADWR gives to each well. It's related to where the well is located, but I won't get into that today. So we'll cover this area. I'll show a few of these wells and how this can affect you directly. Next. Okay, this is called a hydrograph. It comes directly from the website of the Department of Water Resources, where all this data is stored. You can access it. What you need to access is that name, that B1602 name, and you can find it on the web for your own well. What a hydrograph shows is the change in the level of the water in the aquifer. On the left side, you get that by measuring the depth to water. So it increases as you go down. And you subtract that from your surface elevation. So on the right side, you get the water elevation in the aquifer. That allows you to compare the water level across the active management area. The depth of your well, of course, depends on your surface. You can be on a hill or in a little valley. So what's important is the relationship to the entire aquifer. Now, the little wiggles and everything in there are basically due to your pumping that well. So when you pump that well, the water level goes down. And then when you stop, it goes up. So most wells show changes. There are also seasonal changes that occur if your neighbor is pumping or watering his field. So this well is just an example. It's located in central Chino Valley, just off Central and 89, as an example of what these wells do. And you can see, as Ed was explaining, it's had about 100-foot decline since the mid-40s. A lot more data is since 2000. ADWR monitors this well on a regular basis. So you can see there's a lot more data as the decline has basically continued more recently. The red dots mean that the well was recently pumping, so you sort of discount that value. But it was measured, so they posted, but it's suspect. Okay, so now we know what a hydrograph is and where the data comes from. Let's look at a couple other locations. Gary? Okay, this is one of the city of Prescott's pumping well. It's located up, about 4 north in Chino Valley.
No, Center Street.
Is it off center as well?
Yeah.
So this is a deeper well and it's being actively pumped. But again, it shows a decline, which are the red squares there. That's the observed data for that well. Again, there are wiggles because it gets pumped and a nearby well gets pumped, but we're interested in the overall trend. Now, to predict what's going to happen in the future and try to understand the whole aquifer, we run what's called a model. It's a computer program that takes all this data and it simulates water in, water out, to understand how water is moving and what's happening. So those are the blue lines. And the blue lines, again, have a lot of wiggles. This model has seasonality built. So there's a summer and a winter season. So that's what all the wiggles show, what's happening for the different seasons. On the right side, you see there's a blue line that's diving deep. That's me continuing that model past 2010, where ADWR stopped it at that point, predicting, shall we say, or simulating what might happen into the future down there. So again, this is an active pumping well for the city. There's no crisis here. This is located pretty much in the center of the basin. There's a over 1,000 feet of water there because it's deep. So it can keep doing this for a long time, but it's going down. Next one. Okay, here's some other wells, just so you can contrast. If you live out in Lonesome Valley, your well's behaving very similar. It's had a little rise in the 90 to 2000s. The numbers right under the thing itself are days, since the model runs in days, but I've put a scale on the bottom so you can see, again, that's 1940 to 2010. 1525 is in Prescott Valley itself. The model's prediction here isn't quite as accurate. It's predicting a little lower than what's actually measured. The measured, again, are the red squares, but you see the trend, and the trend is similar. And as we keep going into the future, it's going to go down even faster, according to our simulation. Let's look at another one. This one isn't right in the central of Prescott Valley. Again, there are big wiggles here, and that's because, again, this well gets pumped. After it's pumped for a while, they let it rest. When you let it rest, the water level comes back up. And as you start pumping it, it goes down again. Okay, let's have another one over. What's next? This is the west side. This is Williamson Valley. If you go out Williamson Valley, there's a lot of development that's occurred out there. I've just put a bunch of these wells all on the same picture here because they are all the same. They're all running down over 2 feet per year. Some of them are the Granite Oaks well. I don't want to pick on Granite Oaks, but it's going down 7 feet per year. The Democker well just under it is running about 7 feet per year. Over on the left side, over by the fire station, that one's going down 6 feet per year. Why is that? Well, if you look on the left side where all that light brown stuff is in the background, that's a mountain range. You're getting hard rock underneath your house there if you try building. So you can't get water out of hard rock, except maybe a little bit in the cracks. So it's going to go dry a lot faster than out in the center part of the basin. Next. Okay, so how bad is this whole situation? Well, each one of the dots on this well represents a section with at least one well. Where there's a bunch of houses, what you can have at least 8 houses per section, maybe more in the denser areas. So this isn't just 1 or 2 wells scattered. We've got thousands of wells, each pumping away out there. Next. Okay, so now what's going on as we go further north in the Big Chino? There's all this talk about as the Little Chino that I've showed you starts declining water levels, we're gonna pump from the Big Chino. As you see, the Big Chino's up there. People say, oh, there's lots of water up there, so we'll just run a pipe down to the city of Prescott and Prescott Valley and take our water from there. I was also on here is a nice river that comes out of Sullivan Lake. When we showed how that river has been declining, but it's one of the last free-flowing rivers in the state of Arizona. All right, so what's going to happen if we start pumping up there in the Big Chino and stealing their water? Next. Okay, well, this is Williamson Valley Wash running through the middle there. If you go up further north, each one of these little pink dots you see there is a well. So if you think Big Chino is this pristine area where we're going to take all the water we need and bring it down into the Little Chino, I think you've got another thing coming. There are people who live up there now, and a lot of ranching going on up there. So, you know, they've got the same problems we have. If you look at the next slide, here's wells up in the Big Chino Aquifer. Notice the slopes. They're declining since about 2000, similar rates that we've seen in the Little Chino. So I think this data was collected by Montgomery and Associates But it's will end up in the ADWR database if it's not already, because they've got the same names, that everything is there. So it's declining as well. And that's going to have a direct influence on people who live there, on the Verde River, which gets its water from these wells. Is that the last one, Gary? Or I have one more.
No,
Yeah.
that's it.
So that's it. So this affects you, is the summary of my talk here. It's not some big grandiose thing to think about. You've got a well in your backyard. We can have a look and see what it's doing. But I've showed you what your neighbor's wells are doing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So the situation is pretty clear that water levels are going down throughout the active management area, and that the flows in the Verde River are going down. It is particularly disturbing to us at CWAG, as we try and be science-based and look at the facts that are documented. All the information that Ed and Pete gave us straight out of ADWR. It's really disturbing to us when we hear myths, when we hear misstatements and misinformation. And so what CWAG is starting to do now is to tackle this myths and contrast the myths with reality. So I just want to go through a few of these. I showed you that frequently asked questions on our website, and so that's where you can go to get more information. I'm just going to go through a few of these really quickly. So Arizona law will save us. So we've seen elected officials say in both Prescott and Prescott Valley say that because Prescott Valley and City of Prescott follow Arizona water laws, we're good. Our water supply is protected because state law is going to do that. Reality, no. And so I went through over this a lot in the September program, and showed that Arizona water law authorized pumping 28,000 acre feet per year of additional paper water, non-sustainable water. So if Arizona law is going to save us, why do they authorize pumping 28,000 acre feet that doesn't have to be replenished or recharged? It's enough to triple the population in town and increase the overdraft by a factor of 2 or 3 and deplete our groundwater. That doesn't sound to me like Arizona water law is protecting us. So Arizona water law is not going to save us. Another myth that we hear repeated is that we have a 300-year supply and everything is fine. Well, that's a myth. That's not true. The reality is that science cannot predict how long our water will last. That's because the aquifer is not like a tank or a swimming pool. It's more like a sponge. Think of, you got a 5-gallon bucket full of water, and you could put a quart scoop in there and scoop out a quart of water, right? So that's the way a tank would work. And you could scoop all the water out of the bucket. But if you fill up the bucket with sponges and try and dip some water out, there's going to be a lot of water that's held up in the sponges and the fibers and the pores of the sponge. And you're not going to be able to get all the water out. And that's a really rough analogy here to the way the aquifer works. So the bottom line is that science cannot determine the economically recoverable volume of water from our aquifer. If we don't know how much water we can recover, how can you say that it's going to last a certain number of years? You just can't do it. You don't know how much you have. That's made even more complex because we don't know what our future demand is. Hopefully we'll move to some aggressive water conservation and actually cut our demand. Population growth tends to increase the demand. So it's hard to know what's going to happen in the future here. So there's no way that we can say that we have X years of water left. One thing we can say is that continuing to pump more water than is recharged cannot go on forever. And there's a lot more on this in the September program video. Wastewater recharge is the source of another myth. And what we hear is people say, hey, we're okay. We recharge 65%, 95%. You hear all kinds of numbers here. And in reality, no, everything is not okay. If things were okay, you wouldn't see the kind of evidence that Ed and Peter just shared with you. The fact is that every new home consumes groundwater. And so every time you build a home, we're making the problem worse. So in the city of Prescott right now, they recharge about 30% of the water that they deliver in their municipal system. Now, 2 years ago, they improved some water codes and water conservation things. And so if new homes built under those new codes could theoretically recharge up to 75%, that's the maximum theoretical, and that they won't get to that. So someplace between 30 and 75%, depending upon the age of the house and the codes in effect when it's built, is how much you're going to recharge. But even 75% recharge means that every new home consumes groundwater. To make this even worse, the wastewater that's collected in the sewer system and then purified and then recharged, that's recovered. It's pumped back up and used to supply new development. So the recharge doesn't benefit the aquifer. It's just kind of a cycle where it gets put into the ground, it's purified as it soaks into the ground, then it's recovered and used in another to supply more homes. So wastewater recharge is a good thing. I mean, it's good that we're doing it, but it's not going to save us. Then here's another one, talking about the Big Chino Valley and safe yield. The myth here is that importing water from the Big Chino will achieve safe yield. And in the fourth management plan, Arizona Department of Water Resources, affectionately known as ADWR, ran some scenarios that showed that by doing this, they still really didn't get to safe yield. But importing water from the Big Chino is legally authorized, and but it's not going to get us to safe yield because, first of all, there's a capacity issue. The Big Chino Water Ranch can import 8,000 to 12,000 acre feet per year. So they can import 8,068 acre feet of exemption water, which is under Arizona law 45-555 E. And then they can also import historically irrigated acreage water, which is 45-555 B. And so someplace in this range is what's legally available to the Big Chino Water Ranch. And the pipeline that they've got preliminary designs on is for 12,000. So the 12,000 exceeds the current flow of the Verde River. Right now, the Verde is flowing 12,000 acre feet per year. So if you pull water out of the Big Chino Aquifer, which supplies the river, you're going to dry up the river. Well, the thing is that Prescott Valley and Prescott are not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to pipe water from the Big Chino and to achieve safe yield. They are going to use it for growth. Prescott Valley has said that much, and the city of Prescott has said that they will decide later. They have an option on what to do, but the plan is basically to use the Big Chino for growth, not safe yield. So the average overdraft in the aquifer for the last decade has been 13,000 acre feet per year. So an acre feet, remember, is like a football field filled with water, 13,000 feet high. So it'd be like 2.5 miles high. The football field, 2.5 miles deep. That's on average how much we pull out of the aquifer each year and don't, and that's a loss to the aquifer. And that's growing. In 2018, the overdraft was 18,000 acre feet a year. So this is more than the pipeline capacity. So even if you did use all the Big Chino water to reach safe yield, there's not enough water there to do it. So importing water from the Big Chino is not going to get us to safe yields. Plus, Big Chino water imports will dry up the upper Verde River. Now, the Prescott and Prescott Valley have promised in 2010 that they would mitigate the effects of their pumping on the river, but no one knows how that's possible to do at this moment. And so we'll learn more about that maybe this summer. And CWAG is going to do 1 or 2 programs on this whole Big Chino issue in maybe June, July, someplace in there. So we're going to come back to this topic. There's a whole lot of interesting stuff on the Big Chino question. So this is just taking the top off of it. Okay, some local water officials are blaming exempt wells for the problem. And I got to say, I live in Chino on a well that's an exempt well. And so I am particularly annoyed by this falsity. Exempt wells are not the problem. So an exempt well is a small domestic well that ADWR says it's exempt from reporting its pumping. So large wells have to report to ADWR how much water they pump each year. That's the basis for the statistics that Peter and Ed gave you. But small wells don't. There's about 13,000 exempt wells in the AMA. So some factions here are trying to blame exempt wells for the overdraft. Well, fact, Prescott and Prescott Valley together pump almost 76% of the total demand. That's a number from ADWR in 2019. Fact, in the AMA, rural family exempt wells pump 14.2% of the total demand, yet they serve 19.5% of the population. Well, the implication there is that actually exempt wells are being more water efficient than the big municipal providers are. So I thought that was interesting. I don't think there's any way you can say that exempt wells are the problem. These rural domestic wells, you know, these exempt wells serve families, single family homes. They don't really use any more or less water, you know, generally than a home in Prescott or a single family home in Prescott Valley. I mean, it's just a family. Families do the same things. They take showers, wash the dishes, etc., and do the laundry. So there's no reason to suspect that exempt wells are really have a disproportionate effect on the problem. Actually, they have a less effect on the overdraft than the large municipal providers. So rural domestic wells use about 90 gallons per person per day. So in Prescott, I forget the exact number, it's about 110. Prescott Valley's in the low 90s. Rural domestic wells are actually really similar to all the other homes in the area. So this amounts to scapegoating. You know, this is unjustified. And I'm going to stop here before I go off on a serious rant. One of the other things that they're saying is that, geez, now that these other exempt wells are out there going dry, now we have to service them. So these pins are locate large storage tanks, like 2,500 gallon storage tanks on single family lots. And so here in West Chino Valley, there's a whole big cluster of these. These tanks are indicators of possibly failing wells. You can have a tank maybe for rainwater harvesting, but when you look at these lots, you see they don't have anything planted. So maybe the tank is for a commercial fire protection thing, and we can see some of those here in Chino Valley, but this is not a commercial district. Some of the tanks are animal feed storage things, and we pull those out because this is not stable area. So there's about 500 of these tanks centered in West Chino and South Chino along Williamson Valley Road between Prescott Parkway and Outer Loop Road, and a lot in Coyote Springs. These are on the edges of the aquifer. Ed was showing you that these rocky areas around the edge are hard rock areas, and that the aquifer is in the middle. So these are on the edges of the aquifer. The reason these wells are going dry is because the water levels in the aquifer are going down, as Peter showed. And the reason they're going down, the responsible party for this, well, we're all responsible. Everyone that uses water is responsible, but 76% of that pumping is done by the large municipal providers. So I just found it outrageous and offensive to blame exempt wells, especially wells that are being dried up by large municipal pumping, for the problem. And so I'll stop there before I get totally wound up. This is what you'll see in West Chino. This is one of those tanks, and this guy is hauling his own water. There's a public water hydrant in Chino Valley. There's another one in Prescott on Easy Street, and people go in there and fill up these tanks, come back here, pump it into their tank, and then this supplies their house for a couple of weeks. Safe yield, here's another one. There's the assertion that safe yield will protect our water supply. In reality, no. So I need to define safe yield before I get into explaining why no is the answer. So safe yield is a long-term, so that's an important concept, a long-term balance between groundwater withdrawals, that usually means pumping, and recharge. That would be both natural and artificial recharge. So here's a map of the Prescott Active Management Area from ADWR. And so safe yield is the management goal by 2025 for this active management area. So if we don't meet this goal, and we won't, there's no penalty. If we don't meet that goal, there's no incentives to help us meet it. ADWR provides data, we've shown you a lot of that, but they don't provide any assistance in a safe yield plan. A safe yield plan for the AMA is the responsibility of the region, not ADWR. No regional plan exists. As a matter of fact, they're not even talking about discussing about possibly meeting to maybe develop a plan. So with this kind of construct in water law, it's really designed to fail. And it's just not going to happen in this AMA. And so it's not going to protect our water. Safe yield is a political invention. It's not a scientific concept. And so the USGS, in a circular number 1376, capture of stream flow by groundwater pumping, shows in 100 and something pages with a bunch of cool diagrams, they list some misconceptions about the way aquifers work. And here's a direct quote from USGS. Misconception 1. Total development of groundwater resources from an aquifer system is safe or sustainable at rates up to the average rate of recharge. Yeah, no. At safe yield, that means that you've pumped out all the component of recharge that supplies rivers and springs. So at safe yield, natural discharge ceases. You're pumping what would formerly discharge from the river or spring. So rivers and springs will dry up. To me, that's not a concept that protects our water supply. So we're going to have this covered in an upcoming program. It's next in November. So it's on Friday, November 12th at 3 p.m. There's a webinar. So it's titled The Myth of Safe Yield. Pursuing the goal of safe yield is not saving our groundwater. The presenter is Kathleen Ferris. Kathleen Ferris is a noted water attorney in Phoenix. She's the former executive director of the AMWA, the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. She's a former director of the Department of Water Resources. She was a legislative staff attorney when the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was created. So she has a long and deep history in Arizona water law. And I'm just really pleased and honored that she's consented to speak to us on a webinar. So you can pre-register for that at CWAGAZ.org. Maybe starting this afternoon, I'll have to change the link on the homepage so it goes to the right program. So this is the cover from her report. She right now is a senior research fellow at the Morrison Institute, which houses the Kyle Center for Water Policy. So this was a really great report. It came out in May 2021. CWAG has been saying that Arizona water law is inadequate and that I would say that it's corrupt because it has so many exceptions and loopholes that are designed to satisfy the interests of powerful stakeholders. It's not really designed to save our groundwater. And so I was overjoyed that such a significant and respected figure agreed with us. And so they're going to talk to us on November 12th. So finally then, after all these problems, what can we do? What can the government do? We need to modernize water law. That's a political problem. And so that's where you, the voters, come in. It's up to us. Current state law harms and does not protect our aquifer and our streams. We need regional cooperation and we need new approaches, new ideas to solve these problems, such as aggressive water conservation planning, safe yield planning. Water neutral development is a new idea that really needs to be explored. What can citizens do? Well, eliminate outdoor groundwater use is a great way to start. That in Prescott right now, that's about 30% of outdoor water use. In Prescott Valley, their webpage says it's like 37%. You can install water efficient appliances. If you have a well, get your well tested. Test the quality in your well. One thing that happens in wells as water levels decline is water quality declines also. And one concern here is arsenic. It's possible and has happened in many places that falling well levels correspond with increasing arsenic levels. Arsenic's nothing to mess with. Large municipal providers have to monitor that, but individual well owners don't. So we really strongly suggest that if you have a well, you get it tested and consider installing home water purification equipment. CWAG is going to have a program on water quality. I think in February is the current schedule, and we'll go over all this in great detail at that point. You can advocate for sustainable water policies to your local elected officials, and you can vote for candidates who support a sustainable water future. So at this point, we're going to turn this over to the audience. We've got an hour to deal with your questions, and let's see if you can stump the chumps, as Click and Clack said. So,
Gary, yeah.
Gordon, you've been watching the chat for questions?
Yeah, to hit the chat button and ask their questions. But while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I just wanted to ask you and the panel a little bit about growth in water. A lot of people are concerned about what's happening with growth in our region. And so that gets connected to water. And the question I'd like to pose is, what degree do cities and towns, the city of Prescott, the town of Prescott Valley, and Chino Valley, have over the level of growth as it relates to the availability of water?
Okay, well, I'll take this. because there is so much paper water available in the Prescott AMA, water does not constrain growth at this point. And so you can look back at the September program when I treated this in probably more detail than you hoped I would, but it's possible for a developer to purchase water credits, and a developer has to have an assured water supply, has a certificate of assured water supply. If they're building in Prescott, Prescott can issue that. If they're building in Prescott Valley, they have to get that certificate of assured water supply, 100-year water supply. They have to get that from ADWR. And so they can just buy water credits that are from recharged wastewater or from retired farmland, or something that we call the groundwater allowance. And so there's plenty of water available to build a lot of homes. So the control on growth is not so much the water supply at this in the Prescott AMA. The control on growth is municipal policies. The control on growth is who you vote for and how you communicate with them, and how you tell them what you want. So that's the growth control is in the hands of the citizens, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Gary. We can turn now to the chat box here, and we have.
Hey, let me just add one other thought on that.
Sure.
Sorry. I just want to point out that right now, there's over 17,000 housing units that have been approved and granted water. Unbuilt units, 17,000 units, and that's a low number. So there's tremendous momentum built into growth. It may take a decade or more to build out that 17,000 units. But even if we said, we're stopping right now, you've got that much built-in approved growth that will happen. You can't take that back.
Yes, it's kind of a scary future that we're facing, that one that will require, I think, some pretty energetic actions on the part of each of us to speak to our elected officials to get involved, which is kind of a pitch to join CWAG, as a matter of fact. Anyway, back to the questions. One comment has to do with the fact that there are some incentives available by the city of Prescott for investing in certain measures such as rainwater harvesting and efficient toilets. So it's encouraged to take advantage of those. There's a question dealing with very specifics, dealing with what for well owners, advice and so forth. And rather than get into all the specifics there, where can somebody who has a well and has concerns about potential contamination or location, how many feet from the wellhead to septic and so forth, where are sources of information for well owners?
Well, University of Arizona Extension has a lot of information on well owners. I don't have a specific link to that. Actually, it may be in the frequently asked questions on our website. So you should look there. A septic system has to be at least 100 feet from a well. And that's a matter of county health codes. And then was there another part of that question about water quality?
Yes, and some specifics of how, and the specific question was how long contamination takes to reach the aquifer, say, if there's a problem with the septic system, is there any challenge there for water quality?
A properly installed septic system installed according to existing codes is safe and does not contaminate the aquifer. There are some older septic systems that were installed on along Prescott creeks, and the Prescott's coordinator for environmental services is concerned that that is contributing nitrogen pollution into Prescott creeks. Prescott creeks have what's called a TMDL for nitrogen. That's an assignment by Arizona Department of Environmental Quality that specifies the maximum daily, total maximum daily load for some contaminant. Prescott's lakes, Willow and Watson Lake, are also impaired for nitrogen. And a component of that impairment is the water from the creek. So these old septic tanks up on the creeks may be contributing to pollution in the lakes. If a septic tank is installed out in the grassland, out in Chino Valley or someplace, the water table is a couple 100 feet down. You heard Peter talking about that. And by the time water gets down there, by the time septic leachate gets down there, it's been purified by bacterial action and adsorption onto clay particles in the subsurface soils, and it's fine. So.
Okay, good. And I think possibly in the spring as well, we may be able to have a program that deals with information for well owners looking ahead here. Next, let's look at the question, Gary, that you mentioned. One of the possible solutions has this idea of water neutral development. That's what is involved with water neutral development as a new approach for the design and layout of developments.
Okay, so development, let's take a subdivision. So each individual home in a subdivision is supplied with city water. That water is collected at the through the sewer and is then purified and recharged. So if that works well, we could get 70–75% of the water back and back into the aquifer. So if we can come up with another 25% for recharge somehow, then that home would have no impact on the aquifer, net zero or water neutral development. So where do we get the 25%? Well, stormwater recovery is what we're looking at. And we have some early work that was done by the Bureau of Reclamation as part of the CWAG study. CWAG is the acronym from hell. It stands for the Central Yavapai Highlands Water Resource Management Study. In that, so we're working with the data from the Bureau of Reclamation, and it seems actually that it's easily done, that we could easily recover 25% of the water that would be otherwise lost. We could make that up by recovering stormwater. So that means water that falls on roofs, driveways, streets, all kinds of hardscapes in a subdivision would be collected and sent to recharge. The cool thing is that in a subdivision, this happens anyway. And the developers are already paying for it because they have to manage the runoff from their development so that it doesn't create a problem with their neighbors. And so normally they'll build a detention pond and evaporate it. All we have to do is pipe it to recharge. So this actually is something that CWAG thinks. We're optimistic that we can make this work, and we're studying that, and we'll see how that pencils out.
Okay, pretty exciting. I think it's very exciting.
Well, the cool thing is that decouples water use from development. It
Right.
means that the town can develop and grow without impacting the aquifer. CWAG's concern is about the aquifer. And growth, the way it is now, impacts the aquifer.
Okay, we've got a number of new questions here. I will read this next one, if I can, sorry, bring it back to my screen. Just one moment, please. Here we go. If the Verde River is designated as a wild and scenic river under federal protection, what impact would that designation have on continued overpumping and the overdraft in our region, in our AMA?
Right. Great question. The Upper Verde River, basically from Paulden down to almost to Clarkdale, runs through Prescott National Forest, and it's kind of a local treasure, but it's very much underappreciated and unknown. It runs through Prescott National Forest. Public access to it is difficult on weird 2-track roads, and people just don't know about the river. So the Sierra Club did a proposal, a citizen's proposal for the Upper Verde Wild and Scenic River. And actually, I wrote that. And when I wrote that, I worked with Prescott National Forest Planning and the supervisor very closely, and kept them abreast of what we were doing. So when they redid the forest plan in 2015, they had to go out and do their own eligibility study. They did that, and their study agreed with ours. So that means that right now the Upper Verde is protected as a default wild and scenic river. That's not as good, though, as having it designated by Congress. So we are now working on a statewide wild and scenic rivers bill, including the Upper Verde and the Colorado and about maybe 100 other rivers in Arizona. And so eventually we're going to get the Upper Verde designated as a wild and scenic river. Now, on the date that it is designated by Congress, then the Verde will have federal reserved in-stream flow rights. That means an in-stream flow right means that people can't take water out of the river. It has to stay in the river. So that in-stream flow right is subject to Arizona's water law. So on surface water, the first in time has the most senior right. The first diversion for beneficial use on the river has the highest priority right. So the in-stream flow right on the river then would be junior to all existing rights. So it would not constrain existing pumping or existing diversions. It may constrain subsequent diversions. So basically, the federal water law is not going to keep water in the river, and it's not going to constrain existing users, but it will help protect the outstanding and remarkable values on the river.
Okay, switching to another topic, a question related to arsenic levels in the city of Prescott wells. The arsenic levels strike me as high, and I'm curious what we can do beyond what is currently taking place at the Prescott wells, in which certain wells have higher arsenic levels and others have lower, and the water is blended together to just barely meet EPA standards.
Hey, Peter, do you want to handle this? I mean, I could do it, but I need a break.
Take a break, okay. As the question says, the regulations concern the water that's delivered So if you have natural arsenic in a well, which there is, it's naturally occurring on one well, but another well is much lower, you can blend them so that what you serve is below the EPA or state ADEQ standard. That's one way of handling it. The other way is to stop drilling deeper in your wells, because most of the arsenic comes as we drilled our wells deeper. Oxygen gets down there and some geochemical reactions occur, freeing the arsenic from the soil. So that's why some wells are higher than others. It's from the natural sediments. So it goes to the big picture. If we stop drilling deeper, we can lower the arsenic that's coming out of the wells. I don't think that's going to happen. So dilution is the solution to the arsenic currently. I don't know what else you can say about meeting the health risk standards at EPA. And there was just recently in the Arizona Republic a whole article on the monitoring that the state ADEQ has not been doing throughout the state. I refer you to that as well.
Gary, do you want me to comment as well, Greg?
Sure.
Greg, let me lay out some of the EPA regulations and then you can talk about the removal machines. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so 15 years ago or so, 20 years ago, something, the maximum contaminant level for arsenic in drinking water was 50 parts per billion. So they lowered it to 10 parts per billion. And the safe, but their goal, EPA's goal for arsenic in water is 0. So the 10 parts per billion is a compromise between public health and the expense of purifying the water. That means that even 10 parts per billion is not necessarily healthy. It's legal. Actually, there is no amount of water, of arsenic in water, that is without a negative health impact. There's no threshold below which it doesn't hurt you. The threshold is 0, actually. So Prescott is now serving, see, all water systems have to have periodic water quality tests that are filed with Department of Environmental Quality, and those are available. Prescott puts theirs on their website, and those are readily available to you. So when we look at those, we see that Prescott is on the average serving water at 9.8 parts per billion, just a hair under the maximum contaminant level. And they've done that by blending. That is a matter of some concern to me. And it should be a matter of concern to all of us, because what's legal is not necessarily healthy. So Greg, what could they do about it?
Well, this happens to be a particular crusade of mine. We blend generally from 7 wells. Sometimes they're so problematic they blend from 6 or 5. So that number varies specifically because of arsenic levels. One of the wells that they regularly use was the worst. So several years ago, they bought an arsenic removal machine that is specific to that contaminant. If we got 3 more of those machines, the cost would be, it depends who you talk to, $250,000 to $350,000. 3 more machines on the 3 problematic wells would bring the overall level down to around 3 or a little less, which is fabulous. The good news is right now, I sat in on a presentation with the head of the EPA and others. There's billions, literally billions of dollars sitting there waiting for cities or municipalities to apply for it, specifically to provide safe, clean drinking water to, the United States. So they would approve that 300,000 in a heartbeat. I've spoken to the newly elected city councilors and the newly elected mayor. They have all agreed it's important, and I would anticipate that early in the new year, they would apply for that. And then within a few months, we would have those 3 machines operating. And then the 9.8 would go down to 2.8 roughly. So that would be great. So there's an easy solution.
Greg, I asked that question about the arsenic. Can I just clarify something you just said? Was it total cost $300,000 for all 3 new machines, or is it $300,000 for each machine?
It's in total, and it just depends on where the blending occurs. I've talked to Eric Bay about this, and I've talked to the people who sell the machines. So I believe that, yeah, there's 2 wells that are around 8 or 9 without filtration. And then there's another one that's over 10 and does not have a filter on it. The worst well currently has a filter. So we're talking about a total of 300,000. I'm not sure about installation, but it's for all 3.
Thank
Great.
you.
We can deal with some of the specifics. Greg and Brandon, you can work together on that, but that's looks like a great idea to pursue. Moving ahead, we have quite a few questions we still want to get through here. A couple questions dealing with how to join CWAG. Well, that's terrific. It's on our website, and there's a response in chat to the link to that. But if you go to CWAGAZ.org, there's a join, renew, donate spot on the left-hand side, and that's the way to join. So everybody, please, if you haven't already, at the end of the session, we invite you to join. Back to some specifics, though. Does a septic well eventually provide some recharge, or is everything lost to evaporation? And Gary, who wants to handle that?
Well, I can. If Ed or Pete wants to do it, that's fine.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, the loss of water throughout the whole system is due to evaporation. And as Ed showed, as temperature go up, evaporation goes up. Now, there's great debate about how much of your septic effluent can get down 300-400 feet to get into the well without getting evaporated. Estimates run 10 to 20%, highly dependent on your soil type and exposure. I don't remember the specific number that's currently being used. Maybe Gary does, but it's not very significant.
Yeah, USGS uses in their groundwater model for the big Chino use 35%. You hear, if you research this on the web, you see a wide range of numbers from 0 to 35. And as Peter said, it depends upon how that septic tank is installed, what the subsoils are, what vegetation is near, how deep to the water table it is. In short, there's so many local factors that influence this number. I think the fair answer is, who knows? It's someplace between 10 and 30%.
Okay.
And that sounds bad, but I want to point out that right now, the city of Prescott only recharges about 30% to the aquifer. And that's because landscape water is about 30% of the demand. And this is why CWAG keeps talking about don't use groundwater outdoors. I mean, that's the big one, you know. When you use groundwater outdoors, it's not recovered into the wastewater system, and they can't recharge it. Also, a lot of the recovered wastewater is put on what's called direct reuse. So it goes to the golf courses and to Hanson Materials for washing gravel. And so by the time all those uses of reclaimed water occur, they're only recharging 30%, which is in the vicinity of septic tanks. So they can do much better with recharge, and I'm sure they will in the future.
All right. We're going to have to keep our answers a little bit more succinct, guys. So
Okay.
the next question is a question dealing with having confidence that given all the thousands of chemicals in our water, how can we be confident that the water that's recharged and eventually becomes available in the aquifer is going to be safe for everybody over the long term? I hope I've captured the question correctly.
Oh, that's a Peter
Gordon,
question.
excuse me, Gordon, I think it would be helpful if you could just read, if Gary can't see the questions, if you could just read them right from the chat. Then, yeah, so please do that.
You mean me read the questions and
No,
No, I mean Gordon read, instead of trying
Okay.
to sum them up, if he could just read the questions
okay.
that the questioner has submitted.
Go ahead, Peter. You can deal with that.
Yeah, actually, CWAG had a whole program. I guess it was almost a full day seminar on this whole issue about 5 years ago. I don't know if that is still on the website or not, Gary, but the whole question of pharmaceuticals in our water supply is a major issue out there. Generally, if the water spends sufficient time for bacterial action within the soils to work, most of those pharmaceuticals get degraded. I said most. Some of them do not, and we really don't know the answer to that question. It depends on the time, really, that the water spends in the soils and the bacteria working on them before they get degraded. Something that concerns me is that the city of Prescott has recharge basins out near the airport where they're recharging their wells. To increase the efficiency of that recovery, they have recently installed a couple of wells nearby so that the efficiency of recovery of the water, I don't know, that they do not have to report many of these pharmaceuticals in their annual water quality reports. I haven't looked lately to see what they're doing, but generally in the past, they've only reported what they're required to report, which does not include many of these pharmaceutical chemicals.
So Peter is correct. CWAG did, this has been November 13th, 2010. We did a full day seminar on emerging contaminants. And the video from that is in our video archive. So there's like 6 parts of it. We had experts come in from University of California, University of Northern Arizona, University of Arizona, and ADEQ. And so we really looked at this, and there's a rich record there available for you. So cruise through the video archive and you can see that. Go
good.
ahead, Gordon.
The next question is, can a well in Williamson Valley be drilled deeper? And if so, how deep is the water under that area? Is it over any part of the aquifer? I am on Granite Mountain water, and they say there's plenty of water under their 3 wells by Granite Mountain Stables.
Ed, you want to take this?
Well, one of the issues in answering the question is that we don't know where the old basement is under the aquifer fill deposits that are being drilled. I'm aware that the well or wells at the Granite Mountain Water Company have been deepened tremendously over a period of years. Apparently, they haven't reached the basement yet. There's water, going to be water in the aquifer until they reach the ancient rocks that underlie the basin fill there. That's not a specific answer because I don't know how to give a specific answer.
Okay. So unfortunately, it appears that there's not possible to give a direct answer. What we have had a number of people contact us, have we not, Gary, with their concerns over Williamson Valley water situation?
Yes, we have. And if the questioner can just email me, email it be info@cwagaz.org and ask that question. We can look that up. We can find your well and give you info on how deep it is, what the water level is, etc. So we can help you with that. I can't do it now though. So just
Yeah,
email
I'll
us
just
and we'll
add that-
take care of it.
That we are talking about a basin that gets shallow on the sides because we've got, Granite Mountain popping up on the west side. So the amount of sediment that can hold water decreases to zero as you approach Granite Mountain, or very low values that water is only in the cracks. So that's why we call it a basin.
Yeah, and I showed you that map with all the tanks, locations of tanks, and they're on the edges of the aquifer, and they're along Williamson Valley Road. So that's a problematic water area. So it's worth checking out your well. Just email us and we'll see if we can give you some more information. Go ahead, Gordon.
I note that Robert Switzer has his hand up. Robert, could you unmute? Although we're handling most questions through chat, but you've had your hand up for a bit. Could you ask your question, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Switzer, and I'm currently on the town of Chino Valley Planning and Zoning Commission. And so before development comes before, this is more of a private well question. When a development comes before us, it's a private well development. The ADWR is in charge of whether that project gets approval or not for water. And I'm just wondering how they come up with that 100-year assured water supply. There's really no way to come up with that. My well here in Chino, I'm on 1 South. It was drilled in 98 down to 300 feet. They hit water at about 167. And my current water level is down to 254. And, just today learning, we're anywhere from probably my area, 1 to 2 feet per year. This water supply that was assured here for 100 years for this subdivision isn't going to make it 100 years. So I don't see how any subdivision on private wells can be assured a 100-year water supply.
So before a subdivision can be recorded at the State Department of Real Estate, the Department of Real Estate requires a certificate of assured water supply, which is an assured 100-year water supply. ADWR issues that, except Prescott has the ability to issue those equivalent to those certificates. So in Chino, the developer has to go to ADWR. They fill out a spreadsheet that is used to calculate their water demand. And now they have to come up with enough water to meet that demand. So that means first step is that they need credits. So in Chino, that land may have been farmland before that had grandfathered irrigation credits, which when the farmland is fallowed can be converted to extinguishment credits, which can be used to justify a certificate of assured water supply. So when they have the credits, then usually they have to do some groundwater modeling to show that if they pump that much water in 100 years, that it won't impact any senior water rights, and it won't draw the water table down to greater than 1,000 feet below ground surface. Well, so I heard somebody laughing back there, and I think that's appropriate response because we don't think the aquifer that there's that much depth to the aquifer. So the laws, this is like, so yeah, how do you show there's a 100-year water supply? There's legal procedures, legal hoops that get jumped through, and they can qualify. But whether it's real or not is a whole nother question. So I don't know. I'm thinking that a Ouija board is a lot faster and cheaper and probably about as good.
Gary, one thing that's really clear about this 100-year water supply, it is not a 100-year assurance that there will be water on into the future. By taking water down up to 1,000 feet is draining the aquifer. There's no tie-in for the requirement of replenishing that water when the approval is given for the pumping.
All right.
The related question is, how far down can a well, whoops, I don't see the rest. I don't see the rest of the question. How far down can a well go?
It can go down to the hard rock bottom. It can go down to the bottom of the bathtub.
But that varies, does it not?
Yep.
Yes.
On the
Okay.
edges, it's fairly shallow. In the middle of the aquifer, like along Highway 89, runs through Chino. That's in general is the deepest part of the Little Chino Aquifer.
Okay. Here's the question.
And that's,
How about getting Michael Cosentino, who has his hand up?
Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't spotted that. Sorry, was
Michael might have put his hand down. He did also join CWAG. Thank you, Michael. He doesn't have his hand up right now,
okay.
But he has a comment down in here farther.
Farther?
He has a comment, a question about his well somewhere. I'm pretty sure I saw in the chat. Yeah. Do you want me to read his question?
Yeah, while you're at it there, Leslie, please.
Okay, he says, I have a home well. I just put in a new pump. The provider says I am pumping from 307 feet. My well, according to ADWR paperwork, is 300 feet. How can I find out how deep my well is in case my pump company is incompetent? What is a good place to have home well water tested? That's a good question. One that tests arsenic levels and how much?
Okay. Who wants to handle that, Pete or Gary?
Well, let me just get it. If you just go to our website to the frequently asked questions, there's a series of questions on water quality. And is arsenic a problem is one of the questions. Should I test the water in my well is another problem. And we have some recommendations on testing services in that location. So I'm really gratified to note that our website answers your question.
But Gary, what about his question about ADWR says as well as 300 feet deep and his provider says he's pumping from 307 feet. How can he find out how deep his well really is in case his pump company is incompetent?
Well, ADWR's records are often wrong, incomplete, out of date. It's so if there's ADWR is not incompetent, but they're not on top of all this well data. I don't think that if your well driller is measuring things on site, that's good data. I would think that they're competent if they're actually doing a physical measurement.
I'll just add that sediment can get into the well and settle on the bottom. So the actual depth changes with time.
All right, next question. If saving our water lies in the hands of the willingness of our municipal leaders to create sustainable water policies, how do you suggest that communities come together in unity of purpose to most effectively communicate with them? Can we write new policy and propose it to them? Gary.
We can, and CWAG does that. We're really really pleased that Phil Good, the mayor-elect, has been a CWAG member for a long time and participates in our public policy committee. And so we talk with him frequently and we make suggestions. That doesn't mean that CWAG is making policy by any means. That's up to the city council.
Of course.
But I think every citizen has a duty to communicate to their elected representatives. If they're not doing what you want done, you need to let them know. And you also need to realize that they're not going to take actions without some indication that there's public support.
Down lower in the chat,
You got to
Phil,
have their back, in other words.
down lower in the chat, Phil, just Phil Good, our mayor-elect, he may have left, but in the chat down lower, he said, I have to shortly leave the meeting for another obligation. Thank you, Gary, Ed, Peter, and Gordon for another very informative and valuable presentation. Our new city council majority is anxious to get many of these highly important policy changes enacted. Thanks, Phil Good. Yay.
So
I just
that-
want to add, and maybe Gary can correct this, but we've talked mostly about Prescott Valley, little Chino, but there's a whole county out there under different regulations, and have to talk to your board of supervisors about what goes on out there.
Mhm. Exactly.
The Board of Supervisors doesn't really have statutory authority to do direct water management. And there are some bills that, there was a bill that was introduced in the legislature the last 2 years that was introduced by Democrats, so it never even got a hearing. But it would have established rural water management districts. And that is going to come up again in this next session. So that would give, this idea was suggested by Mojave County, Kingman area. And what it would do would be to allow a county to do kind of an AMA-like management function on their water with greater local control of the water policies. And frankly, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Local control sounds good, but on the other hand, there are plenty of examples where local control has been unenlightened and ineffective. So we got to look at the details on this bill and then see how we think about this, but it's kind of hopeful. I just don't know yet if it's the best thing, but it's worth looking at.
Also, the Yavapai County Board of Supervisors is currently considering whether they're going to vote unanimously to consider water adequacy when approving new subdivisions. And they just had a presentation by Jocelyn Gibbon. I wasn't able to see that. Then it's going to the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 21st, I believe. And I'll be watching for that and putting that in the CWAG calendar. Because I think this is the most they've actually talked about it ever. So
No, actually, they talked about it when Chip Davis, Tom Thurman, and who else? And Craig Brown was on the board. And it was a 3-person board before they went to 5. And they really considered it and they decided not to do it. And what the adequate supply rule does when adopted, it's a consumer protection measure. It would require a subdivision outside of the AMA to get a 100-year water supply. And if they don't qualify for the 100-year water supply, all they have to do is tell the first buyer of each parcel that they don't have an adequate water supply, and they can still sell it and build. To get the adequate water supply, they just have to show that after 100 years, it won't drop the water table down to 1,100 or 1,200 feet below ground surface. So it's a pretty weak consumer protection rule. And it certainly does not protect rivers and springs. And it will certainly permit the depletion of groundwater. So another example of how Arizona water law, kind of sounds good and doesn't really do the job.
But so Gary, should we be supporting this at all?
Not
Is it
sure.
better than what we have now or not?
I don't know. We need to have a debate, talk this out.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
This
this
stuff is
isn't
also
for us
complicated.
To talk about that, Gary and Leslie. Let's
Yeah.
move on. Here's a question from, as a new resident, how do I find out information on my own well in Williamson Valley Ranch?
Well, I sort of,
not very easily is what I would say. Just email us and we'll help you with it.
Yeah. And that's true with a lot of people here. If we don't get to your question or don't answer adequately, please contact at info@cwagaz.org. Next question is, if the Upper Verde is now protected and we know that pumping the Big Chino will dry up the Verde, doesn't that necessarily impact the decision? I assume that's a decision regarding the pipeline.
Well, it ought to. I mean, there's 16 species listed by the Endangered Species Act in the Verde watershed. Those species are riparian obligates or riparian facultative species that need a riparian area to exist. There's many other features in the Verde that are worthy of protecting. So the protection it has now basically protects the habitat from degradation. But it does not maintain a flow in the river. The pumping that will destroy the river in the Big Chino Valley is outside the boundaries of the Wild and Scenic River. And so Wild and Scenic Rivers Act doesn't cover that. This is a huge problem. The federal Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is not going to keep water in the river. The only people going to keep water in the river are us.
Okay, next question. I'm a photographer interested in documenting the remaining Del Rio Springs. Is there a way to find out who to contact, ask permission, since much of these lands are likely privately owned? My thinking is a photographic presentation of reality could be very effective.
Yeah, if just email me and I can help you with that. I already have a lot of that documented, but you're welcome to help out on photographic documentation on Del Rio Springs and the Upper Verde River. I'd be happy to help with that. And I sent you a private chat message with my email address, or you could send it to info@cwagaz.org.
Here's a question. We're from Phoenix, where we have the same issues. Is there a similar organization like CWAG in Phoenix?
I don't know either.
Anybody have any ideas?
Well, the Sierra Club tracks a lot of this.
Yeah.
Start with them.
I guess that that non-answer just shows how unique CWAG is.
Yeah.
We actually get that question from people in other states.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, a comment that the Daily Courier has published a good article regarding Arizona water quality, including arsenic. I suspect that has to do with the monitoring situation. Any further elaboration on that? Okay.
I'm not familiar with the article.
Okay. Oh, there's a continuation here. In part, the article states, quote, as far back as 2006, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, was working on state standards for arsenic and uranium to match the federal standards, but stopped after opposition from the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It argued that federal standards were not appropriate because arsenic and uranium naturally occur in Arizona aquifers. Article was published 9/30/21.
Right, I read that. The questioner is referring to an audit report by the Arizona Auditor General, who was reviewing ADEQ's compliance and found that they were lax in 10 areas in water quality reviews, and setting the standards for arsenic and uranium were some of those. ADEQ has replied to the audit report saying, you're right, we didn't do that, and we will do it. But the interesting thing is that, you know, the opposition from the Chamber of Commerce was enough to push them over the edge. The official answer from ADEQ is that they had funding shortages and that they had people retire and they never got the staff to actually do that work. But they didn't ask for the staff and they didn't ask for the budget. So I think ADEQ just got a little egg on their face here. And the Arizona Auditor General is come up in my estimation with this report. So maybe this will get fixed in a short while.
Okay. Another question, this one says, does a good filter on your faucet filter out arsenic in most pharmaceuticals?
There's many kinds of filters. Some filters just take out chlorine or particulates. So when you say filter, that's not an adequate description. If you just go search on Amazon, you'll see a lot of different filters for heavy metals, arsenic, sediment, chlorine. There's a whole set of them. You can buy kind of a suite of filter canisters that mount underneath your sink, and each canister takes out a different stuff. So there's huge amounts of commercial products there that will do purification underneath your sink. I don't think I'm not too worried about the shower, you know, but any drinking water is first priority.
Okay. Well, I think we have a couple notes that are notes of appreciation, and certainly from my standpoint, I'd like to thank Gary, Ed, and Pete for their contribution. And I'd just like to say one final word, given my responsibilities as chair of CWAG's Education and Outreach Committee. And that is, today, we've tried to emphasize why people should be concerned, why they should be concerned about the challenge and threats to our sustainable water future. We've provided one half of the discussion had to do with the scientific reasons. What's the science with causing the lowering of our aquifer levels? The second part has to do with the misleading information that is being promulgated out there by elected officials and others who have vested interests in maintaining certain policies that are in place. And I think what I'd like to suggest is that everyone pay attention and learn a little bit more about why these misleading statements are not supportable from a science standpoint, and why it's up to the citizens to challenge the elected officials and others, their staff members, who are continue to try to mislead the public. Well, on that note then, please give some further thought to possibly joining CWAG. I can use some help on the Education Outreach Committee. And thank you all for joining us today.
Shit.
Pete, you have something to say, or you wave?
No, I'm just saying goodbye. Thank you.
Okay, I'll wave goodbye too. Thank you all so much for attending. It was fun, and stay in touch with CWAG. I'm gonna end this now and go about your day. The sun is shining. It's Saturday. The weather is nice. Enjoy this wonderful world we live in. Goodbye.
Bye now.